beaten kid to Mr. Universe. All the odds against him. But nothing could stop Arnold Schwarzenegger. Tonight, we'll dive deep into where Arnold came from, the fire that made him unstoppable, the heights he reached, and the controversies and accolades along the way. From a tiny Austrian village to the world stage, this is the incredible journey of a man who refused to quit. If you enjoy stories like this, consider subscribing, but only if you really like the content. And tell me in the comments what time and where you are listening from. I always enjoy reading those. The story begins in Thal, a tiny village in Austria. The year is 1947, a country still licking its wounds from the devastation of World War II. Arnold Alois Schwarzenegger was born into a world of scarcity. His childhood home was a modest stone house built in the late 19th century. No central heating, no plumbing. Winters were brutal. The mornings began with the smell of wood smoke and the sting of cold air that crept under the doors. His father, Gustav Schwarzenegger, was a police chief, a stern man shaped by war, whose discipline was ironclad and often physical. Gustav had served in the German military during the war, and he carried the scars, both visible and invisible, into family life. Arnold's relationship with his father was marked by high expectations, constant criticism, and at times harsh punishments. His mother, Aurelia, was the warmth in the house, resourceful, practical, and determined to keep the family together despite the tension. Arnold was the younger of two brothers. His father favoured the older, Meinhard the stronger, more traditionally obedient son. This favouritism planted a seed in young Arnold. If he wanted attention, he'd have to outshine everyone around him. As a boy, Arnold was small, wiry, and restless. He played soccer in the fields, ran through the woods with friends, and helped with chores, chopping wood, carrying water, tending to the family's small garden. But underneath it all was a restless energy, a gnawing sense that this small village could never contain the life he imagined. Austria at that time was a place of tradition, where dreams outside the expected path, learning a trade, joining the military, settling down, were seen as unrealistic, even foolish. Young men stayed close to their roots. They didn't dream of America, Hollywood, or the Mr. Universe stage. But Arnold did. Even before he knew exactly what those dreams looked like, something in him rebelled against the idea of an ordinary life. In school, he wasn't a standout student. His teachers described him as bright but unfocused, more interested in daydreams and drawing than in arithmetic or history lessons. But he had a quiet confidence, a belief that one day somehow he'd escape the narrow expectations of his village. And so, in those early years, Arnold's world was small in geography, but vast in possibility, at least in his mind. The conditions of his childhood, the cold, the scarcity, the demanding father, were obstacles, yes, but they also became the raw material for his discipline, his drive, and his hunger to prove himself. This was the ordinary world, and soon it would collide with the spark that set everything in motion. Arnold was 14 when the first real spark lit the fuse. It began in the most ordinary way, a friend inviting him to a small dusty gym in Graz, the nearest city. In Thal there were no real gyms. Strength training wasn't common, but in Graz, tucked into an unassuming building, was a place unlike anything he'd seen before. The smell of iron and chalk hung in the air, and the sound of clanging plates echoed off the walls. Men with massive arms and broad chests were pushing their bodies to the limit. To Arnold, it was like stepping into another dimension. At first it was curiosity, then something deeper. He learned about the sport of bodybuilding, about symmetry, definition, the art of sculpting the human form. It wasn't just about being strong, it was about creating a work of art from your own body. And for a boy who felt invisible in his father's eyes, the idea of building a body that could not be ignored was intoxicating. But the true turning point came one afternoon when Arnold flipped through the pages of a bodybuilding magazine and saw him Reg Park. Park wasn't just a champion, he was a living myth. 3-time Mr. Universe, Herculean physique, movie star. He had played Hercules on the big screen, battling monsters in exotic settings. For Arnold, Reg Park wasn't just a man, he was the embodiment of escape. Here was someone who had taken the discipline of bodybuilding and used it as a passport to the world. Fame, fortune, Hollywood. The more Arnold read about him, the clearer the path became. Win Mr. Universe, go to America, become a movie star. That was the plan. There was no plan B. This was the first time in his life he had seen a clear route from where he was to where he wanted to be. The poverty, the cold house, the strict father, all of it faded in that moment. He had found his purpose. But dreams are fragile when they first take shape, and not everyone in Arnold's life shared his excitement. His father dismissed bodybuilding as a waste of time, something for vain men who accomplished nothing of real value. Friends laughed. Even some coaches told him the odds were impossible for a boy from rural Austria, and yet instead of discouraging him, each doubt added another log to the fire. Arnold cut pictures of bodybuilders from magazines and pinned them on his wall. Every rep in the gym became a step toward his future. In those early days, the dream was still just that, a dream, but the call to adventure had been sounded, and there was no turning back. The dream quickly turned into obsession. Arnold began taping photographs of Reg Park and other champions to the walls of his small bedroom, creating what looked less like a boy's room and more like a shrine. He studied every detail, the way they posed, the cut of their muscles, the slope of their shoulders. He wasn't just admiring them, he was taking notes for the body he intended to build. The gym in Graz became his sanctuary. Whenever he could scrape together a few shillings for train fare, he went. Hours slipped away as he moved from one exercise to the next, pushing himself to exhaustion. Outside the gym, he improvised with what he had, lifting barrels, carrying pails of water, doing endless push-ups and sit-ups. If there was no weight, he found one. His father thought it was vanity. Friends told him he was crazy. Coaches said the great champions had resources he would never have, money, connections, the best equipment. But instead of breaking him, every doubt was fuel. Every laugh, every dismissal was one more reason to prove them wrong. By the time other boys his age were worrying about apprenticeships or trades, Arnold was already living in the future he envisioned. In his mind, the path was crystal clear. Step 1, win Mr. Universe. Step 2, go to America. Step 3, become a movie star. It was an outrageous dream for a boy from a farming village of barely 2,000 people. But to Arnold, it was the only plan that mattered. There was no plan B. Because as he would later say, if you gave yourself a safety net, you were already planning to fall. He could see it all as vividly as if it had already happened. The stage lights burning hot as he hit the winning pose, the plane ticket to America in his hand, the movie posters with his name in bold letters. The call to adventure had sounded, and Arnold Schwarzenegger had answered. From that moment on, nothing in Austria, not tradition, not skepticism, not even family, was going to hold him back. Arnold's first true ally came in the form of Kurt Marnell, a name already well known in Austrian bodybuilding circles. Marnell was a former Mr. Austria, broad-shouldered and barrel-chested, the kind of man who could silence a room simply by walking into it. For Arnold, who had studied photographs of champions as if they were holy texts, meeting Marnell in person was like stepping into the pages of one of those magazines. Their paths crossed at the Athletic Union gym in Graz. The gym was far from glamorous, a converted space with worn wooden floors, cracked plaster on the walls, and the smell of chalk embedded into the air. Yet to Arnold, it was a cathedral of iron. He moved between exercises with an intensity that caught Marnell's eye. While other young lifters stopped to chat, Arnold trained as though each set was the one that would decide his future. Marnell approached him after a workout. "You train hard," he said, his voice deep and steady. For a teenager used to criticism or mockery, those words landed with surprising weight. Arnold didn't just hear a compliment, he heard recognition. The mentorship began almost immediately. Marnell took Arnold under his wing, teaching him not only the proper form for each lift, but the philosophy behind it. Training wasn't just about building muscle, it was about building balance, symmetry and control. Every rep had to be intentional, every set had to serve a purpose. Under Marnell's guidance, Arnold's routine became more structured. Chest and back on one day, legs on another, arms and shoulders given their own focused attention. Posing practice became as important as lifting, the art of displaying the body you'd worked so hard to build. Arnold learned that the judges didn't just score muscle, they scored presentation. But Marnell offered more than technical guidance. He was a gateway into the world Arnold dreamed of entering. Through him, Arnold met other serious lifters, some of whom had competed internationally. He heard stories of London's massive bodybuilding stages and the fierce competitions in America. Arnold's own career proved that even Austrians could rise in the sport. It wasn't all fantasy, it was possible. Arnold also opened doors to opportunities. He encouraged Arnold to enter local contests and, when possible, arranged for him to train with visiting athletes. He explained how to build a reputation, how to carry yourself as a professional even before you became one. He drilled into Arnold the importance of discipline, not just in the gym but in life. Many people can lift weights, Arnold told him. Few can do it every day, without fail for years. Those are the ones who win. Arnold absorbed every word. For the first time he had someone who didn't just tolerate his ambition. He shared it, fueled it, and shaped it. In later years, Arnold would credit Arnold as one of the key figures who put him on the path to greatness. Without that early mentorship, the boy from Thal might still have found his way, but it would have been a much lonelier road. With Arnold's guidance, the dream no longer felt like a distant star. It was a map now. The destination was the same, Mr. Universe, America, Hollywood, but the steps toward it were clearer than ever. By 1963, Arnold's training was no longer a hobby. It was a mission. Every lift, every meal, every choice in his day was bent toward one purpose: becoming a champion. Under Kurt Arnold's guidance, he had built not only muscle but momentum, and now it was time to test himself beyond the safe walls of the gym. That first real test came in the form of a small local competition. The venue was modest, a multi-purpose hall in grass with folding chairs set up for a modest crowd. There were no television cameras, no bright spotlights. But for Arnold, stepping onto that stage was like stepping into a new world. He was just 16. His physique was raw compared to the veterans, but he carried himself with the poise of someone who expected to win. Under the hot lights, he went through his poses: the front double biceps, the side chest, the classic twisting shot, each one delivered with precision. When the judges announced the winners, Arnold didn't hear his name called for first place, but he placed high enough to taste something new. The thrill of competing, of putting his work on display for others to judge. The loss didn't discourage him. If anything, it sharpened his edge. He returned to the gym the next day with even more urgency. The stage was no longer an abstract dream. He had stood on it, felt its pressure, and survived. Now he wanted to dominate it. In 1965, Arnold entered the Junior Mr. Europe competition. The stakes were higher. Competitors were older, stronger, and far more experienced. But this time, Arnold's preparation was relentless. He refined his diet, studied posing routines late into the night, and visualized the moment his name would be called. When that moment came, when they announced him as the winner, it was more than a trophy, it was proof. Proof that the boy from Thal could beat men from bigger cities with better resources on an international stage. That victory became his passport to the wider bodybuilding circuit. The following year, at just 19, Arnold placed second at the NABBA Mr. Universe in London. The loss to the reigning champion Chester Yorton was a bitter pill. Arnold's massive size had impressed the judges, but Yorton's balance and definition won the day. Arnold took note of every critique. Weak points weren't failures, they were assignments. Crossing that first threshold wasn't just about competing, it was about stepping fully into the life he'd imagined. Every competition was a crossing, leaving the comfort of training behind to enter the unforgiving space where preparation met reality. By now the line between Arnold's old life and his new one was clear. The boy who chopped wood in the Austrian cold was still there in spirit, but he now had a new home, under the lights in front of an audience, chasing a title that felt closer with every contest. By the late 1960s, Arnold Schwarzenegger was no longer just an ambitious young man from Austria. He was becoming a recognizable force in the bodybuilding world. But with each step upward, the stage grew more crowded, the competition more ruthless, and the stakes higher. The NABBA Mr. Universe stage in London was unlike anything he'd experienced before. The hall was packed with fans and photographers. The air was charged with the smell of tanning oil and adrenaline. The competitors were not just athletes, they were seasoned performers who had perfected every detail, from their posing routines to the way they held eye contact with the judges. Arnold's first brush with a true rival came in the form of Chester Yorton. Yorton wasn't the largest man on stage, but his definition and symmetry were almost flawless. When Arnold lost to him in 1966, it stung deeply. Yorton had exposed weaknesses in Arnold's physique. Calves that needed more size, definition that had to be sharpened. But instead of sulking, Arnold treated it like homework. He returned to Austria with a list of flaws to correct, and the determination to erase every one of them. It was during this period that Arnold forged one of the most important alliances of his life, Franco Colombo. Franco was a compact powerhouse from Sardinia, Italy, strong, fearless, and fiercely competitive. Where Arnold had towering height and mass, Franco had dense muscle and raw strength from years as a boxer and powerlifter. The two became training partners, pushing each other in the gym and watching each other's backs in competition. Their friendship became legendary in bodybuilding circles. They trained like warriors, often twice a day, and played pranks with equal enthusiasm. Yet beneath the jokes was a deep trust. Each man believed in the other's ability to reach the top. Franco would become not only an ally, but a lifelong friend, one of the few who understood the cost of Arnold's ambitions. The international circuit also introduced Arnold to new kinds of tests: cultural, personal, and professional. Traveling to competitions meant dealing with unfamiliar languages, strange foods, and the constant strain of being far from home. It also meant sizing up new rivals, men like Sergio Oliver, the Myth, whose physique was so overwhelming it seemed carved from another reality. Facing these giants, Arnold realized that bodybuilding wasn't just about who had the biggest muscles, it was about who could tell the most compelling story with their body. The stage was a battlefield of psychology as much as aesthetics. Eye contact, confidence, pacing, these were weapons, and Arnold began to master them. But the higher he climbed, the more he encountered envy, whispers that he was arrogant, accusations that he was too calculating. In truth, Arnold was calculating, but not in the way his detractors thought. Every move he made was in service of the bigger picture. Every rivalry was a chance to learn. Every defeat was fuel. By 1967, Arnold had already reclaimed the NABBA Mr. Universe title, becoming the youngest man ever to win it at just 20 years old. The victory was more than a trophy. It was a declaration that he had learned from his losses and returned stronger. The tests would keep coming, the allies would be few but loyal, and the enemies, they would be many, but none of them would stop him. By 1968, Arnold had conquered Europe. He'd won multiple Mr. Universe titles, built a reputation as a rising star, and carved his physique into something that drew gasps the moment he stepped on stage. But Europe wasn't the summit. For Arnold, the true heart of bodybuilding, the place where the sport's legends lived and trained, was America, specifically Venice Beach, California. Gold's Gym. The opportunity came through Joe Weider, the influential publisher of Muscle and Fitness, Flex, and other bodybuilding magazines. Weider had been following Arnold's rise and saw marketable potential in the young Austrian. He extended an offer: come to America, train at the best gym in the world, and compete against the very best in the sport. For Arnold, it wasn't just an invitation, it was the opening of the door he had been pushing against his whole life. Leaving Austria meant more than stepping onto a plane. It meant leaving behind his family, his friends, his familiar language and culture. It meant moving to a country where his accent was thick, his English was broken, and his bank account was thin. It meant betting everything on himself. The first days in California were a shock. The sun was brighter, the streets wider, the people louder. Gold's Gym was like nothing he had ever seen, a temple to strength. The walls were plastered with photos of champions, and every corner held athletes whose names he'd only read about in magazines. Training alongside them was both humbling and electrifying. Here, he wasn't the undisputed champion of the room. He was one of many, all of them hungry, all of them chasing the same crown. Sergio Oliva, the reigning Mr. Olympia, was there, his presence as imposing as his physique. The Myth was the man to beat, and Arnold knew it. Outside the gym, life was lean. Arnold shared a modest apartment with Franco Colombo, who had also made the leap to America. money was tight, and the cultural adjustments were endless. Ordering food at a diner could turn into a comedy of misunderstandings. Yet Arnold treated every challenge as part of the training. If he could thrive here, in the home of the sport, he could thrive anywhere. Joe Weider's mentorship extended beyond the gym. He taught Arnold the business side of bodybuilding, how to give interviews, how to pose for magazine covers, how to market his name as much as his physique. The competitions in America were a different animal. The crowds were larger, the judges sharper, and the media coverage far more intense. Arnold entered the 1968 Mr. Olympia and placed second to Oliva. It was a defeat, but one he had anticipated. He was learning the terrain of the battlefield he intended to dominate. From that point on, every workout, every meal, every posing session was aimed at one thing: dethroning Sergio Oliva and claiming the Mr. Olympia crown. He had crossed into the heart of the sport, the inmost cave where the greatest rewards awaited. The Mr. Olympia stage was unlike anything Arnold had faced before. The lights were blinding, the crowd roared with anticipation, and the men he faced were not just competitors, they were titans. At the top stood Sergio Oliva, the myth, a man whose physique defied belief. His arms looked carved from stone, his waist impossibly narrow, his back like the spread of a giant's wings. Arnold's first clash with Oliva in 1969 was a test of both muscle and mind. He had come to America with the dream of taking this title. But here, under the relentless lights, Sergio proved why he was untouchable. Every pose Oliva hit seemed to swallow the stage. Arnold fought to match him, pushing his confidence into every flex. But when the dust settled, Oliva remained champion. Defeat could have shattered him. Instead, Arnold treated it as an apprenticeship. He dissected the loss in forensic detail. Oliva's advantage wasn't just in size or symmetry, it was in presence. When Sergio stepped on stage, he owned it. Arnold resolved that if he couldn't outsize him, he would out-strategize him. The next year, 1970, Arnold returned with a new arsenal. His calves were thicker, his definition sharper, and his posing routines timed to command the audience's eyes. He studied Oliva's habits, identifying the moments where he could steal attention, and when they faced off again, Arnold was relentless. He held poses longer, dared Sergio to match his endurance, and smiled with the confidence of a man who knew he belonged there. The result, Arnold Schwarzenegger, at just 23 years old, was crowned Mr. Olympia, the youngest in history. It wasn't just a victory, it was a coronation. The crown he had imagined as a teenager in Thal was now in his hands. But the title brought new pressure. Every champion is hunted. Every newcomer wanted to be the man who beat Arnold. Over the next 5 years, he defended his Olympia crown with the same mix of charisma and calculation. He learned the mental warfare of bodybuilding, making rivals doubt themselves before they even stepped on stage. He would greet them warmly backstage, then deliver a subtle comment about their conditioning, planting seeds of uncertainty. By the time they walked under the lights, Arnold already had the edge. The ordeal was not a single night in New York or London. It was a campaign. Each year's Olympia was another battle, and with every victory, Arnold's legend grew, his silhouette becoming as iconic as any movie star's face. By 1975, when pumping iron cameras captured his final pre-retirement win, Arnold wasn't just a champion, he was the embodiment of the sport itself. The boy from a cold stone house in Thal had not only entered the inmost cave, he had claimed its treasure. By the mid-1970s, Arnold Schwarzenegger wasn't just winning Mr. Olympia, he was redefining what it meant to be a champion. 6 consecutive titles had made him a legend in bodybuilding, but Arnold had never seen the Olympia crown as the finish line. It was the sword he had come to claim, the tool that would open the next door. That door was pumping iron. The 1977 documentary was unlike anything the sport had seen. Directed by George Butler and Robert Fiore, it followed Arnold and a cast of competitors, including Lou Ferrigno, as they trained for the 1975 Mr. Olympia. But this wasn't just a training film, it was a character study, and Arnold, with his quick wit, charm, and occasional mind games, stole every scene. Audiences who had never set foot in a gym found themselves captivated by his confidence, his humor, and his unshakable presence. He wasn't just a man who lifted weights, he was a personality. The documentary went beyond the bodybuilding niche and landed in mainstream culture, turning Arnold into a household name. With that exposure came opportunity. Producers began to see him not just as an athlete, but as a potential leading man. Hollywood, however, was still skeptical. His accent was thick, his name long and unfamiliar, and his physique so extreme it seemed impractical for most roles. Casting directors struggled to picture him as anything other than a bodybuilder. Arnold's first film appearances were small and awkward, a bit part in Hercules in New York, a villain in Stay Hungry. But with each role he learned, acting, like bodybuilding, was a craft, and he approached it the same way. Break it down, study the masters, drill it until it works. In 1982, his breakthrough arrived. Conan the Barbarian was a perfect storm, a role that demanded a larger-than-life presence, physical dominance, and a mythic quality that Arnold could embody naturally. When Conan hit theaters, audiences didn't see a bodybuilder trying to act. They saw a warrior who seemed born for the role. The film's success proved he could carry a blockbuster. The reward wasn't just fame, it was proof that the plan he had envisioned as a teenager, win titles, go to America, become a movie star, was not just possible, but unfolding exactly as he had imagined. Yet Arnold understood something crucial. This wasn't the end of the journey, it was a new beginning. The sword he had seized in bodybuilding could now be wielded in Hollywood, and he intended to use it to carve his name into an entirely different pantheon. Hollywood had welcomed Arnold with Conan the Barbarian, but it was The Terminator in 1984 that transformed him from a rising star. Directed by James Cameron, the film gave him a role that weaponized everything casting directors once saw as a disadvantage: his accent, his size, even his limited dialogue. The T-800 didn't need to blend in, it needed to dominate the screen, and Arnold did, delivering the now immortal line, "I'll be back." The success was seismic. The Terminator was made on a modest budget, but became a global phenomenon, turning Arnold into a bankable action hero overnight. From there, the 1980s unfolded like a perfectly executed training plan. Each film was another set, another rep: Commando 1985, Raw Deal 1986, Predator 1987, The Running Man 1987, and Red Heat 1988. Each role expanded his brand: the unstoppable soldier, the unstoppable cop, the unstoppable survivor. But Arnold didn't just rely on brawn. He understood that to stay at the top, he had to evolve. He embraced comedy with Twins 1988, proving he could generate laughs as easily as he could deliver one-liners. The film's box office success silenced critics, who had pigeonholed him as a one-note action star. Off-screen, Arnold was just as strategic. He invested in real estate, amassing a fortune independent of Hollywood paychecks. He studied politics, business and public speaking, attending events, and forging relationships that would serve him far beyond the movie set. Even at the height of his action hero fame, he was laying groundwork for something bigger. By the early 1990s, Arnold had become one of the most recognizable faces and bodies in the world. He commanded salaries in the tens of millions, and his movies were global events. Total Recall 1990 and Terminator 2, Judgment Day 1991 pushed his star power to its peak, with T2 breaking box office records and redefining the action genre. But the road back in Arnold's journey wasn't about returning to bodybuilding, it was about returning to the core principle that had guided him since Thal. Always move toward the next challenge. Hollywood dominance was secure. The real question was, what was the next mountain? By the early 2000s, Arnold Schwarzenegger had already conquered two worlds, bodybuilding and Hollywood. He had the wealth, the fame, and the global recognition. But for Arnold, mastery was never a place to rest. It was a launch pad. The next leap would take him into a world even more unpredictable than bodybuilding or filmmaking. Politics. The moment came in 2003 during California's recall election. The state was facing an economic crisis, energy shortages, and growing public frustration with the political establishment. Arnold saw an opening and, more importantly, a need. He announced his candidacy for governor on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno, bypassing traditional political rollout and turning the campaign into a media spectacle overnight. Critics scoffed. They saw a movie star chasing a vanity project, a celebrity dabbling in politics. But Arnold approached the race the way he had every other arena in his life, with preparation, relentless outreach, and an unshakable belief in his ability to win. On the campaign trail, he leveraged his fame but avoided relying solely on it. He spoke about fiscal responsibility, bipartisan cooperation, and rebuilding California's economy. His celebrity status drew massive crowds, but his message kept them listening. When the votes were counted, Arnold had done it again. Against the odds, against the experts, he became the 38th governor of California. The headlines wrote themselves, from the Terminator to the Governator. His 2 terms in office were a crucible. The political arena was not like a movie set, where the hero could always win in the final act. There were real stakes, entrenched opposition, and Arnold pushed for environmental reforms, championing California's landmark Global Warming Solutions Act, and worked to reform the state's workers' compensation system. But he also faced budget battles, economic downturns, and criticism from both sides of the aisle. Through it all, he maintained the same public composure that had carried him through every stage of his career. He spoke often about service, about leaving things better than he found them. And when his second term ended, he left Sacramento with a legacy that was as complicated as it was groundbreaking. A Republican governor who had championed green energy, a Hollywood action star who had navigated one of the most complex political landscapes in America. This was Arnold's resurrection, not a return to his old self, but a transformation into something new. He had reinvented himself again, proving that the rules of typecasting didn't just apply to movies, they applied to life. And Arnold, as always, refused to be typecast. When Arnold Schwarzenegger left the governor's office in 2011, he could have stepped quietly into retirement. He had already achieved more than most could in 10 lifetimes. Bodybuilding champion, global movie star, governor of the most populous state in America, but Arnold had never been wired for quiet. The elixir he carried back from his political odyssey wasn't a trophy or a title, it was perspective. Politics had deepened his understanding of leadership, service, and the power of influence beyond personal gain. And now, he intended to channel that experience into the next chapter. He returned to Hollywood, not as the same young man who had once fought for every role, but as a cultural icon whose name alone could headline a film. His comeback began with The Last Stand 2013 and continued with ensemble blockbusters like The Expendables. He reprised his most famous role in Terminator Genisys 2015 and Terminator Dark Fate 2019, proving that even decades later audiences still wanted to see him say, "I'll be back." but acting was only part of the return. Arnold became a leading voice in environmental advocacy, launching initiatives to combat climate change and promote renewable energy. He used his platform to push for bipartisan solutions, framing environmentalism not as a political issue but as a moral responsibility. His Arnold Sports Festival, one of the largest multi-sport events in the world, continued to inspire athletes of all levels. Philanthropy became another cornerstone. He supported after-school programs, Special Olympics, and veterans' causes, often speaking directly about the opportunities America had given him and his responsibility to give back. In interviews, Arnold reflected on the through line of his life: the discipline of bodybuilding, the strategy of Hollywood, the responsibility of public service. Each arena had given him tools. Each victory and each failure had been part of a larger plan to leave a mark not just on industries, but on people. Now in his 70s, Arnold's legacy is not confined to a single field. He is remembered as the immigrant who defied every limitation, the competitor who refused to quit, and the leader who crossed boundaries most would never attempt. The boy from Thal had returned from his journey with more than title. He had returned with proof, living proof, that impossible dreams are only impossible until someone refuses to accept the limit.